I was away last Sunday. I was in Toronto. I flew into Toronto, and then I got on a bus with a group of people and went to, I was in Muskoka Woods, Muskoka, which is a place, I don't know if it's north, south. I think it's north of Toronto. I don't know. I can hardly find my way home from here, so don't ask me. Anyways, went to this retreat center, and I was speaking to a group of young adults. There was probably 100 or so people there, and it was a really great time. But anyways, the retreat center, they brought me to my room. They said, "Here's your room. We hope that your room is okay for the weekend." Anyways, my room was actually at this retreat center, this camp. My room was actually nicer than my house. Really, like I walk in, there's this big fireplace and 2 bedrooms and a huge bathroom. They had a shower there that was so big that you couldn't touch the walls. So but I came home because I love you. But anyways, it was really great. There was about 100 people there, and in that group of 100 people, there was probably about 20 or so different nationalities of people. And so it was quite an interesting experience, and we had a fantastic time. And I really believe that God did some really great things there in our time together. But it's always nice to be home. On the day that we went to the airport, when I flew out, I got up at 2:30 in the morning. My dad drove me to the airport at 3. I left at 3, drove to the airport, and traveled to Toronto. Then went there, did some stuff, got on a bus, went there, was there. Ended up that night we had a service. The service was at 10 o'clock at night. So I've been up since 2:30 in the morning. The service was at 10, and it was a great time. But it's nothing like coming home to your own bed. And your family. That's what I meant to say, and your family. And no, it was really a great time. But thank you for those who prayed for me. We're making our way through a series called Little as Much. And the idea behind the series is that all of us want to make changes in our life. All of us say, you know what, this is the new year. I would like to change this. I would like to change that. And I think that we just need to understand more and more that sometimes we come up with these big changes. You know, there's been times in my life where, like, I'm going to read the Bible, you know what I mean, through 6 times this year. Or I'm going to do these. And sometimes we make these plans that are so big that it's almost impossible for us to do them. And sometimes I think we just need to realize that sometimes just changing the littlest things can make the biggest impact in our lives when God is in it. Sometimes a little is a lot. And we've been talking about a passage in Timothy about where Paul says to Timothy, he says to be an example to the believers, or especially to the believers, to those, be in speech, in conduct, in love. Those are the 3 that we've talked about. And it's funny because he's talking to Timothy as a young leader, and you would think that when he says be an example in speech, you'd think that he'd be saying be careful what you say when you stand up in front of people and talk and teach. But that's not really what he's saying. Study tells us that he's talking about your private conversations. The conversations that you just have that aren't on the stage, that aren't in front of people. Just the conversations, everyday conversations. Pay very close attention to those, because those change your outcome. How you speak matters. And the same thing is for us. I don't think the warning for us is to be careful how you teach or be careful how you do this, but my warning to us is if we would like to see real change in our life, we need to change how we talk in our everyday life. How we encourage people or how we don't encourage people. Those things need to change. That how we talk in our everyday life, in our regular speech, needs to change, both publicly and privately. And we need to understand that how we talk, we talked about 2 weeks ago, is how we speak changes the atmosphere around us. What we say changes the atmosphere around us. It changes people's attitudes. I've had people come into my office over the years of ministry furious. I mean, furious. I'm not here. I mean, no one gets angry here. And no one in Kent County gets angry. But other places. Come into my office, furious. And I'm leaving the church because you said this, or you did this, and you did this. And you know what? How I spoke to them changed the atmosphere. Because I say, you know what? Go ahead. Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. I can say whatever. The rest of you will get that joke later. But you know what I mean? I say, yeah, go ahead, leave. No problem. See you later. But how we respond to people changes the atmosphere. How we talk changes the atmosphere. I've had people come into my office or come into my home in total, meltdown, just emotionally, physically, spiritually, totally just melting down. And the words that you say matter. And they change things. We can change things from negative to positives, from hopeless to hopeful. Our speech, and what we talked about is that our speech is copied by other people. People start to talk like we talk. We had a few examples of that, which we won't mention again. Then we talked about being an example in conduct, that our lives are constantly teaching people. Not only do what Pastor Silas said last week, he said, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. Our lives are constantly teaching people by the way we act, by the way that we carry ourselves. Talked about love, that love and finding the balance in love is difficult. And the Bible lies out, as Pastor Silas said last week, the Bible lies out in Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind. In this passage of Scripture that we're going to read again this morning, he says that be example in speech, in our words. Be example in our conduct or in our actions. These are warnings to Timothy. He says, be example in love. And another way that could be translated in love is to be example in your attitude. Love, be example in your attitude. We would normally be talking about faith today because it's the next one on the list. But we're actually going to talk about faith next week. Because next week is the Sunday right before our team leaves to go to the Dominican Republic. And so we're going to be talking about faith in that moment. But faith is, we all know what faith is, but faith is in this, it's even deeper than that. It's about our beliefs and our faith in God. Today we're going to be talking about, he says, be an example in purity. I mean, this kind of makes sense that he says this to Timothy, because Timothy, he says, is a young guy. We realize that he's not as young as maybe we would think he is. If someone would have asked me how young Timothy was, I would have said, 18, 19, 17, somewhere in that range. But he wasn't really. He was closer to 40. But to be an example in purity, or that would translate, be an example in holiness. So if you could turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 4. Verse 12. And we're going to read some other scripture today, but we're just going to read this again. So Paul is addressing Timothy, and he's going through talking about how he speaks to people and all these things. And he says this in verse 12. Don't let anyone look down on you because you were young, but set an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Like I said, Paul wrote this passage, and there was some debate at one point if Paul wrote it, but it's widely accepted that he did. And he's writing Timothy as a young leader, as a young pastor. This guy got saved under Paul's ministry, so it would be like me going and writing to Denis. Denis got saved a couple years ago here. It'd be like me writing to him, because me and Denis would have a similar relationship that Paul and Timothy would have. And so it would be like me writing to Denis and saying, listen, Denis, here's some things that I would like to say to you. And I would write these things out to him. It was that type of relationship. Be an example to believers, or especially to believers. Those days, and when you get 150 people, I don't know how many people would have been in this church, but when you get people together, there's always going to be problems. There's always problems. There's people that don't get along. There's people that don't really like each other. And that's okay. And if you can believe this, not everybody likes me. I know, I'm shocked about that every time I think about it. But it's true, not everybody likes me. I can remember at one of the churches that I pastored at, I remember this guy came to me a few months after I was there, and he was like, listen, I just thought I should come and tell you and say that I really didn't want you to come here. Well, I don't really understand why he thought he had to tell me that, but he did. He felt he had to. And he said, I didn't really want you to come here. And by that time, we had experienced some really great things with people getting saved and youth ministry and all those things. And I said to him, I said, well, I really hope that that has changed. And he said, no, it hasn't. So believe it or not everybody gets along. Have you ever met someone and you're just like, man, me and this person are going to hit it off. We're going to be friends. Me and Scott were like that. When we first met, obviously we didn't know each other, and when we met each other, I thought, this is a guy that I would like, that I could hang out with. I liked his sense of humor, which is weird. His sense of humor is weird. But I thought, man, I really like his sense of humor. I like the way that, right? It was just one of those things. And then when I would visit Scott, when he had his business downtown, and I remember the first day I met Patrick. And I walked in, and I thought, man, I really like this guy. I could really get along with him. And sometimes you meet with people. Have you ever met someone that you thought, me and them wouldn't be friends? It's not that you didn't like them. It's not like anything else. You just didn't have that connection with them. And so in this church, there would have been issues, just like there is in churches today. And just to be clarified, just because you like someone or just because you don't think you'd hit it off with someone doesn't give you the right, or me the right, to treat them any differently. That's right. We still have to be kind. We still have to be an example. Amen. I just want to put that out there in case you think you'll start being mean to me. Please don't. But Paul seems not only to be writing to the church, but he's writing to Timothy. And he's speaking, like I said a couple of weeks ago, it says, don't let anyone look down on you because you were young. It seems to be this underlying insecurity with Timothy. And I can understand that when you're younger, ministering to people that are older than you, sometimes that insecurity can, oh, they're not going to listen to you. You're just a young punk. What do you know? But don't let people look down on you because you were young. Basically, this is an encouragement to him to just don't depend on who you are, depend on who he is. Don't let people look, don't worry about that. Depend on who God is. It says, be an example in purity. The word purity means this, not mixed or not contaminated. That it's pure. There's nothing else mixed in with that. He's saying, be an example in purity. I mean, purity seems like a very obvious thing to talk to this young man who's going into ministry. And I don't mean to pick on men. And in this culture that we have today, purity is something that is a struggle for everybody across the board, men and women, and all ages. If I told you the types of things that they talk about in my daughter's class at school, you wouldn't even believe what I was telling you. But in these days, he's addressing Timothy. He said, be an example in purity. And it seems to make sense, because a lot of men get themselves into trouble by not being pure. By looking places and going places that they should not go. I think you guys understand what I mean. But he's saying, be an example, because it's difficult, not only in that culture, but maybe even more in this culture, that it's difficult to live a life that is pure. Because everything around us is pulling for our eyes and for our attention. Amen. And it doesn't matter what your age is. It's pulling for your eyes and it's pulling for your attention. And he says, Timothy, be an example in purity. And when I studied this, and I studied it in the original language, and I studied what scholars believe about this, there's pretty much two ideas. One is that he's talking about the idea of, Timothy, you need to be pure. Don't go around and don't be going to have sex outside of marriage, and don't be doing this and don't be doing that. That type of purity. But the most common study of this passage, when they go and they look back at all of Paul's other letters, all the other books and the letters that he wrote, Because from the original punctuation and how things were written, this is what they believe. That Paul is referring to purity in relation to the other four things that he's mentioned. So he's saying, Paul, yes, you need to be pure. But he's saying this. Paul, you need to be pure in what you say. You need to be pure in your actions. You need to be pure in your faith. You need to be pure. And he's warning him against these other four things, that these things can become unpure. You need to be pure, Timothy. And that's what he's getting at. It's not this command to force people not to look down on you, because he can't do that. It's talking to him about his insecurity, and it's talking to him about the fact that he needs to remain pure in his speech, his love, his faith. And that's what he's saying to him. It's an instruction on how to live so that no one has an excuse to look down on you. See, it's different. It's not this command to say, Paul, Timothy, don't let people look down on you. If they look down on you, make sure you tell them. And that can feel like the tone of the passage. But it's not. It's saying, don't live in a way, in love, faith, and pure. Don't live in a way that people have an excuse to look down on you. But be an example. So that, and I say this phrase a lot, that you live in a way that your life speaks for itself. That if someone says, oh, I saw Troy here doing this, that those that really know me would say, no way. There's no way that Troy did that, because of the life that I've seen him live. Or Troy, I went into Troy's office, and you can't believe it. I walked in there, and I tried to talk to him, and he said, get out of here and go, and I said something bad to them. You would be like, no, there's no way. And that's what Paul's saying. Don't give someone an excuse to look down on you. Because if you mess up with your speech, you mess up with your conduct, you mess up with love, and if you mess up with faith, it will give someone a reason to look down on you. And when they look down on you, it'll be harder for you to gain your credibility back. I was talking to a friend recently who was in ministry, and he's been out of ministry now for 5 or 6 years. And he was out of ministry because he did something with money that he wasn't supposed to do. I don't even know what that is. But he's been out of ministry. He's gone through restoration. He's gone through all of these things. But he said the hardest thing for me was to build back the trust with people. Because I gave them a reason to not trust me or to not believe me. And these are 5 areas: speech, conduct, love, and faith, and purity. These are often main areas where people struggle. But when we commit our lives to being an example in these areas, then it increases our witness to those that are around us. It increases the credibility, or what people think about us and what they think about God. Because nothing is more confusing to people than someone who worships God on Sunday and curses Him on Tuesday. Nothing's more confusing than that. It confuses people. They say, how can you go to Grace Church and worship Him and sing, I surrender all to you, and then you curse Him on Monday when you jam your finger or hit your toe? Or how can you worship Him on Sunday and not act with and do the right thing in business? How can you do that? Because it doesn't make sense. In that passage, as Paul is saying to Timothy, don't give someone a reason to not listen to, respect, or hear your message. See, when you feel like people look down on you, this is the way I look at this. When people look down on me and say, Troy, you know what, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. And it happens to me sometimes. I have 2 things that I can do. I can either get upset, I can get frustrated, I can try to defend myself, or I can say, you know what, maybe this is a time for me to examine me on the inside. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm causing them to think that way about me, because maybe I'm not being an example in those areas. Are we setting an example that is visible or people can see in all areas of our life? Are we being an example and being like Jesus? That's what this whole thing is about. And my goal for you today is that all of us would go home with our journals, and if you haven't got a journal, they're at the back, that we would go, and it would be a time of examination for all of us, that we would look at our lives and say, okay, how am I doing? Am I being an example in speech, in love, in faith? How is my example? And if my example isn't very good, then I'm not being a good reflection of Jesus, but I'm being a bad reflection on Jesus. And my goal in my life is to always reflect Jesus, not to leave a bad reflection on Him. It says, don't let anyone look down on you. That's a great statement if it pushes us to look inside of us. For me, it's kind of like the command it says in the Bible. It says, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with everyone. The Bible tells us. As far as it depends on you, live in peace. It pushes us to examine ourselves. Am I doing everything I can to live at peace with those around me? And it pushes this examination. But the problem is Christians don't like people that sin differently than they do. So instead of examining ourselves, we like to examine others. I think that it's that instruction, but live in peace, or don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. It pushes us to look inside. In Romans 12, and this verse from 1 Timothy, all about you ought to live and respond to others. I pray that your life and my life is lived as an example. An example that gives no one an excuse to look down on me and say, you know what? Troy is not a good example. But to be an example in purity. You say, Troy, how do I apply this to my life? How do I say, okay, I want to do these things. How do I do it? Very practically speaking, here it is. Our goal for all of us is to always try to be like Jesus. So number one would be this. Always go to the original. Don't compare yourselves to other people. Always compare yourself to Jesus. If we want to be an example in purity, in faith, in hope, in conduct, in speech, we have to try to be like Jesus. You don't have to say, don't say things like, well, at least I don't swear as much as... I won't give any example. Or at least I don't do this like... Yeah, well, at least I never cheated on my wife like... Well, at least I'm not divorced twice like... But when we start using other people as our measuring stick, that's when the slow fade starts to happen. We always need to compare ourselves to Jesus. The Bible tells us to be holy as I am holy. Now that is a tall task, to say the least. And in fact, it's impossible. But basically it's telling us to be like Him. Don't try to be like others. Because if you try to be like me, you're in bad shape. You need to be like Jesus. Because I will let you down. I will make mistakes. I will cause you to stumble. But He never will. Always go to Him. Don't say, you know what, well, I'm going to be like Troy because Troy's like the closest thing I know to Jesus. You need more friends, if that's the case. But I'm going to try to be like Troy. That's like a good starting point. Always start with the original. Never get sidetracked. Never get convinced to compare yourself to somebody else. Number two, guard your eyes and guard your mind. If we want to be an example in these things, we need to guard our eyes and guard our mind. Because what we let into our life is very, very important. And people, I hear people all the time, yeah, but it's just a movie. Well, it's just this. Yeah, but sure, you don't understand. Like, it's just a little bit of... Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. And watch your character because it becomes your destiny. We need to be very careful of what we watch and what we let into our minds. Because if we spend time thinking on things that we should not think, I have a weird obsession. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to let you in on it, okay? Me and Joanne share this obsession. Well, we're both 40 because Joanne's 40 today. But I love TV shows like Forensic Files. Okay? So TV shows where they have to look at all the evidence to try to figure out who did the murder or stole the money or whatever the thing is. And I have this weird obsession. I don't know what it is, but like I am really, really love, maybe I should have, maybe could have been like a, no I couldn't have. But maybe I really love it. And I have this obsession. I just love to watch these shows, and I have them all saved at home so that I could watch them. And I just love these Forensic Files. And so I hear people say to me all the time, "Well, Troy, I just watched this movie, and I'm going to tell you, just give you some advice. Stay away from those things that are dark spiritually, that are demonic." Because you can say, well, it's just a little bit. But when we play with those things, they find a place in our mind and in our heart. Be very careful. And it's funny because I watch these shows, and the other day Penny was saying to me, "Troy, you've been watching a lot of this Forensic Files show." She's like, "I just want to ask you a quick question." I said, "What's the question?" She's like, "Are you planning a murder?" She's like, "I just want to be clear. Like, are you planning on trying to get away with a murder?" No, the answer is no. But one thing about these shows that I've noticed this theme is when they finally find out who the person is, and they say, "Why did you do it?" It always started with a thought. What I thought, if I could do this, and I could do this, then I wouldn't lose my kids, or I wouldn't lose the money, or I wouldn't. You talk to somebody that's had an affair, you say, "Why?" You say, "Well, I thought that that's what I needed." And we got to be very careful about our eyes and our mind, because our thoughts become our actions. Number 3, guard your body. Guard your body. If we're going to be an example in faith and love and all those things, and be an example in purity, we need to guard our bodies. Here's a good piece of advice if you have kids or grandkids. I don't have this problem with my kids anymore because they're older, because Noah's going to be 12 and Alex just turned 16. But when Noah or Alex were young, let's say they were a year old, and they would cry in the middle of the night. Say it's 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they would cry in the middle of the night, and we would get up. Well, just imagine if I got up to them and I said, "Well, it's 1:30, you're awake, let's stay up for the day." I just let them get out of bed. And we just got out of bed and just lived our day. It would mess things up because it wasn't time to wake up yet. But that's not what I did. When I went, I checked if the diaper was dry, checked all the things, fed them a bottle, did all the things, and then put them back to bed because it's not time to wake up yet. I want to give you some advice. If you have kids or grandkids, that life is designed for our sexual desires to wake up at a certain time. Do not encourage your children to wake up their sexuality earlier than they need to. Because I'm going to give you some advice. When it's woken up, it never goes back to sleep.
That's right.
Ever. You're not going to take your kid all 15 or 16. Listen, I changed my mind. Dating's a bad idea. So, and you know what? All these things that you've done, we're going to change our mind. We're going to put that back to sleep. It doesn't work that way.
No.
Anyone in this room that you know when you've dated, when you've become sexually active, that doesn't go away. And he's telling him, be an example in purity. Wake it up when it's time. Don't wake up our sexuality earlier. Noah's 12 years old, and it was funny because Stella was saying today, saying something about Noah dating, and we were laughing, and it was a funny story. And I thought on myself, and when she left, I thought under my own breath, I thought, over my dead cold body. Seriously, I did. I thought, over my dead cold body. Why? Because it's not time to wake up yet.
That's right.
I'll give you some more advice since you asked. That when you are in a relationship as a young person, and sorry young people, I'm picking on you, but it doesn't matter your age. When you're in a relationship, in closing, wherever you are in that relationship, let's say you date for 6 months. And it's your first boyfriend or your first girlfriend. This is advice for parents. Just remember this. And let's say in this relationship that you've started the process of dating. You've held hands, you've kissed, and you've become sexually active. When that relationship ends, that ending point becomes the new starting point. Because when you're 17 and you break up, you don't go back to holding hands again. It doesn't work that way. Because sexuality has been awakened. And you say, Troy, that's a weird thing to talk to. I've seen sexuality ruin every single age. Between a child who was taken advantage of to someone who was 80 years old. That sexuality ruined their witness. And my encouragement to parents and grandparents is don't encourage your kids to wake it up. Because once it's up, it ain't going back to bed.
That's right.
And I encourage you that whatever stage you find in your life, to always go to the original. To always guard your eyes and your mind. And to guard your body. And the fourth thing is to guard your time. To guard what you do with your time. Psalm chapter 1 says this. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or take or sit in the company of mockers. Blessed is the one who does not walk, stand, and sit. If we want to be an example in purity, in faith, in love, in conduct, in speech, you need to watch your time. And this passage in Psalm 1 is all about time. It's about a progression of time. Blessed are those who do not walk, who do not stand, and who do not sit. It's about time. Because there's certain relationships that take place as you walk. And there's a certain level of intimacy that takes place. And then there's a certain level when you stop and you begin to stand and things become more serious. And then when you sit, and that's when things can get out of hand. And he's saying, watch your progression of time. See, there's nothing wrong with watching forensic files. But watch your time. Because in that time becomes a progression. And we're all in danger of it. Watch your time. Be careful who you walk with. Be careful who you stand with. And be careful who you sit with. The thing is, regardless of our age, we're all called to be an example. Faith, in love, in speech, in conduct. He's calling us to be pure in all of those ways. To have a pure faith like a child. Don't be childish, be childlike. And he's saying be pure in your talk. Be pure in your actions. Live a life of purity. Watch your thoughts because they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, because those will become your destiny. Those will become the outcome of your life. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I think I'll be a drug addict today. No one, it doesn't work that way. It's a progression. And like I say often, we get there very slowly. And I hope that this little is much, when God is in it, I hope that it turns you inward to yourself. And say, God, am I being the best example in my words, in my actions, in my love, in my faith? I'm really excited about next week to talk about faith. Because I think faith is one of the things that we have abused or used wrongly in the church, outside of the church. I think faith is actually very different than what we might think. But I would encourage you this week to take a journal, to take a pen, to sit down and say, how am I doing with my words, my actions, my love, my faith? Am I pulling people towards Jesus, or am I pushing people away from Jesus? All of us are called to purity, to holiness. In closing, we're going to sing this song. Why don't you stand together? My prayer for you